So thanks everyone for joining. This is a webinar all about climate change. So it's titled Navigating the Storm, and we want to try to understand a bit better about the kind of the growing importance of weather and climate risk in construction. I think we're going to have a really good conversation today. So I'll introduce the research that we've done. I'll introduce the speakers that we've got for our kind of panel discussion. And we'll talk through some of those interesting perception gaps that we found in our global survey. And once we've had that panel discussion, then I think we'll kind of finish with a little bit of discussion around technology solutions and some of the things that we maybe can do to address that perception gap. And then hopefully we'll have time for questions. So if you do have questions, please just pop them in the chat. You should be able to ask questions using the Teams interface. Yeah, if you do have any questions, just pop them in there. So myself, I'm the founder of EHAB. We're a technology startup who work in the weather and climate space. So we have a risk management platform which helps construction companies to analyze their plans and start to understand how weather and climate is going to impact them. And we also integrate with Deltek. So I'll pass over to Rob to introduce himself.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I'm Rob Edwards. I'm a product director here at Deltek. I have responsibility over our schedule and risk-related products. I did start out as a civil engineer working in heavy highway construction. So I have had some practical experience sitting in a field trailer on a job site when it was pouring outside and trying to account for weather, which was always interesting back in the early days. Look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Rob. And we've also got João. João?
Hi, everyone. Yes, João Diaz here. Today I'm here representing AACE International as a director for Region 9, which includes Europe and Africa. I'm also a civil engineer as Rob. I've been on site for 15 years working for large infrastructure projects. And yes, as also part of my tasks in the beginning of my career, especially when I was tendering for large construction projects throughout Africa in a tropical weather region, was part of my task to really do the weather assessment and obviously count the average, especially related to precipitation, and count obviously the average of precipitation per year and per month. In order to get a clear picture about the average, but also the non-working days for the different form of scopes. So this is a topic that tells me a lot, and it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here, and looking forward to the discussion as well.
Thanks so much, João. Thanks both. So the kind of the research that we did at EHAB was really sparked by some research that actually came out from the UK government at the end of 2022. And that research started to unpick and understand that our infrastructure here in the UK and probably in many other countries around the world is actually quite susceptible to extreme weather events. And the analysis kind of found that there were lots of things that weren't being done to increase the resilience of our infrastructure. So, you know, when I say infrastructure, I mean our energy assets and our transport assets, you know, the things that ultimately underpin our economy, really important things. And from that, reading that research, we kind of started to think, well, actually, how resilient is the construction industry to the changes that we're seeing? So, you know, what we're seeing at the moment is a great increase in severe downpours and rain events. All of this is obviously driven by increasing temperatures, which are changing at different rates and different speeds around the world. Of course, temperature has health implications for people, both who are doing the construction work themselves and also all of us. So it can have a really negative impact on people outside when they're working. And so, you know, all of this change, all of this global change that's happening made us think, well, we need to start to understand how well the industry is dealing with this, because of course it's going to have an implication on health and safety. It's going to have an implication on project timelines, on budgets, on insurance, on a wide variety of things that ultimately underpin how well we build and how profitably people in the industry, how that underpins their work as well. So the research is called The State of Climate Resilience in Construction. And we were lucky enough to be able to speak with and survey and interview a large number of people from the construction industry from all over the world. So it was quite a big white paper that's going to be coming out soon. There's 60 different questions, and it kind of drilled down into how does weather impact you today? What are the things that you're doing about this risk? But some of the most interesting questions, I think, were really around people's perception of this risk, because I think it's perception of risk is quite an important factor in actually dealing with that risk. And we also had some other contributing authors, like the Royal Society for Protection of Accidents, or Prevention of Accidents, sorry. So it was quite thorough. And what we're going to share today is just a small taste of some of those insights, so that we can use them as discussion points to talk about this topic of perception of risk in relation to climate change. And this is just to give you a little bit of an idea of where the participants came from. So, almost 50% did come from North America and Europe, but then we had a big section of folks from all over the world. So it should be a relatively representative view of the global view of weather risk in construction globally. So I think that's quite an important piece to mention. And as I've already mentioned, I think the fundamental thing here that underpinned the research was that this is happening, right? We've seen in the last 20 years, really, a massive acceleration in extreme weather events. And this is all really driven by that global temperature rise. And so, the science is that the more temperature and the higher the temperatures are, it means that the quicker things can evaporate up into the atmosphere. And so the more water vapor the atmosphere can store. So I think it's about 7% more water vapor that the atmosphere can now store, which means that when you have rain events, they tend to be heavier and more severe and more violent when they do happen. And they can often be more frequent as well, depending on the geography that you're in. Or it might be the opposite, in fact, that you're getting a drought, more frequent droughts because of this type of action. So that's kind of a thing to bear in mind and to note. But the first key finding that I want to introduce, and that I'd like to invite you, João, and Rob to kind of have a commentary on, really is this key finding. So we asked people where they ranked or perceived weather risk to be in terms of an impact to their business or their project. So bear in mind, we were asking professionals who might be project directors, but also planners, also project managers or sub-agents. So people at varying levels of the business. And the kind of overriding information that was provided was that probably the majority think that it is a risk. It's actually in the top 10. Big chunk, the largest chunk, thought it was in the top 5 significant risk. 7% thought it was the most significant risk. But then there's a big chunk who either didn't see it as a real concern or in fact not a concern at all. So maybe, João, if you're thinking, what does this kind of tell you? Do you agree with this kind of spread? Do you think that kind of makes sense? Can you maybe explain if you've got any thoughts around the numbers here?
No, it's definitely interesting results. Yeah, I would probably tend to agree. It really depends. I think whether you are on site, whether you are not exposed to that risk on a daily basis, whether you work for a construction business in Europe, or whether you work for a construction business in South America, right? I think we will get a different answer in this type of different locations and exposures. An example is, having 5 years of working for Brazilian top 5 contractors. That was definitely the #1 priority to every single one, from project director to supervisor, to have a confidence around the weather risk. And obviously that's related to the potentially the high and large precipitation numbers in Brazil. Obviously, it's not the same asking someone in Portugal or someone in Germany, do you care about the precipitation that much? Perhaps you will get a different response. And the same in Finland, right? People will be concerned about the low temperatures, and rather than precipitation, you will perhaps focus on temperature. But again, that is, I think you get a different perspective in different regions of the world, and that's why I think these answers might make sense. And obviously I'm giving examples of places where I have been, and I actually have been experiences these different criteria for different weather variables. So yeah, I would probably say I would obviously, in my case, as a planning professional, I would obviously say that we should be at 90 to 100% number, and it should be assessed no matter where you sit, no matter which type of project. It should be part of the daily tasks. But that's my perspective. But I do understand that currently the construction industry do not see the things in the same way.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Rob, do you want to jump in on that?
Sure. As Joe was mentioning, in different regions, they're going to consider different types of extreme weather. But I too was surprised in the construction industry that the number of people who see it as a top risk isn't higher. There are other types of projects which are more indoors, obviously, but within construction, I would have thought, at least considering it or perceiving it as a high risk would be a much higher number. I did some research using, Copilot, and just within the last year here in the U.S., the number of states that had extreme high temperatures, new records for extreme high temperatures was quite large, and most of them are over 115 degrees, and I don't think people could be out productively working in high temperatures like that. But we've also had in the U.S. Severe snowstorms recently. You might have read about, I think, 18 feet of snow in California this winter in a snowstorm. So there's in different areas they're going to be impacted by different things. The other thing I was learning about is like in several of the U.S. states. I'm in Colorado, and we had the largest wildfire ever about 2 years ago. Texas has had theirs this year, and so some people might look at risks not directly driven by the weather, but the long drought and high weather together contribute to other things like wildfires and that sort of thing. So, my general thought was, I'm surprised the number's not higher. And, we tend to hear every day of extreme weather somewhere. So I would have thought 90% would be a better number as well, but interesting.
Yes. Yeah, it's a great point. And I think quite a few people I've spoken to have suggested that people have a very short memory, right? So if it was 2 years ago that you had the snowstorm in your area, then and then you've had a nice summer since then, maybe you've forgotten. Of course, that shouldn't be the case in a business context, but of course it can still be relevant. No, thanks, guys. That's really useful. The second key finding, which I think again kind of follows this same line, was just asking people assuming that they have had a weather delay from the weather, what was it? What was the weather type that impacted them the most? So the big chunk here is rainfall, and as you've already kind of said, João, right, in certain regions that is the big. And that's the one you mentioned as well, actually, Rob, when you said you were working on site. So, just out of the context of this audience, 100% have said rain, have mentioned rain. my kind of 2 cents on this was that high temperature was the next highest. I thought maybe wind or cold might be a bit larger, but maybe that's to do with the fact that we have had some pretty, here in the UK at least, some pretty hot summers recently. So yeah, do you guys have any thoughts on this?
No, I think, I mean, I think it's as you mentioned, I think rain and precipitation is definitely the first one that comes to at least to my mind when sitting in Europe. And high temperature, it's interesting. I think high temperature and low temperature is also should be in the same, I guess, in the same mark. But again, it really depends, and it might be related to the amount of people that answer on a specific region. But definitely the rain is, I think, is also the most visible, right? So if you are doing excavation or earthworks in general, you will definitely have the rainy day, but you will also need to account for recovery days, right? Or the preparation to restart to work. So it's actually the one that has the most impact usually in time, perhaps. And it's visible, right? So I think yeah, it makes sense, definitely.
I can certainly remember, when I was on a bridge project in Georgia. Georgia's famous for their red clay, and any significant rain would make it a lost work time. As João mentioned, both for the lost time during the rain, but also recovery. Trying to not get mud all over your reinforcing steel and that sort of thing before you were getting ready for a pour or something. So it certainly seemed to impact us the most in the heavy construction business, and anywhere getting up out of the ground. The other thing we have a lot of in Colorado is high winds. The design load for wind speed here in Colorado is higher than a Category 5 hurricane, 167 miles an hour for a lot of the buildings. And we get, a number of those days that, we have high wind warnings. So it's regionally affected. We're near the Rocky Mountains here, and so we get a lot of wind coming off the mountains. But, interesting findings.
Yeah. I think one last thing to say, actually, João, which calls back to your point about people's perception, because it's got a greater delay that can factor in as a higher perception of the risk, is because of the higher temperatures we've been having, it's baking the ground, and so it's making these kind of flash flood type events more likely to actually cause a flood, as opposed to just the rain running away. And so I did read some research which is suggesting that in certain areas of Europe and North Africa, because of these high temperature events followed by rainfall, there's just a greater probability that a flash flood event is going to happen. So that may actually be, like you're saying, Rob, like it's a combination of factors, but actually it's the rain that is the one that is perceived really as the issue, because it ultimately is the thing that results in the delay, but it may be that the temperature was actually an exacerbating factor in that case. But I'll move on to the kind of the third key finding. So this one I thought was pretty interesting. So we kind of asked people to compare what they think or how they think climate change will impact their company in the next 3 versus 15 years. We did ask kind of other sets of years as well, but I thought this was the kind of the shortest to the longest time frame that we asked about. And really the swing was that a large group of people kind of swung from towards kind of it being a significant negative impact over that 15-year time horizon, which I think stands to reason, right? I think everyone understands that this is a long-term thing that will get worse over time. But I was also a little bit kind of concerned that quite a large proportion, so about 48%, in the 3-year category and then 41% in the 15-year category thought that the impact will either stay the same or actually be a positive thing. There will actually be a positive impact from climate change over these time horizons. So I just wondered how you guys thought how that aligns with the thinking. And of course, we've got different regions that are factored in here. So it could be that, you know, some just view that the weather is going to be better for construction. But yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, unless I'm selling weather stations, I would probably see the positive impact, right? But rather than that, yeah, I'm a little bit confused with the results, to be honest. Rob, do you want to?
Yeah, I found it puzzling as well that, you know, tending towards a positive impact, although, as you say, maybe the thing, you know, warmer weather will be better for construction in certain climates, but either that or it's the kind of thing that makes me think maybe in the future in the research giving some open-ended questions for them to explain, or, you know, if there's an opportunity to go back to them, you know, what do they see as being the positive impact in the future, you know? But
yeah, no, that's a very good point. And maybe the last thing to point out here is that, yeah, there's a swing a little bit towards some folks thinking there's a positive impact, but the larger swing is still to the significant negative impact. So it's kind of like there's a polarizing, isn't there, where, you know, maybe some people are just perceiving that it's going to be beneficial, not necessarily knowing what that might be. Obviously, just, you know, climate change, you might associate it with global warming, but of course that doesn't necessarily mean that you understand there might be more storm events or what have you. So yeah, definitely concerning but interesting. This one, we're now, I think, moving in a little bit more into what are the solutions, what are some of the things that we can actually do. And so what we asked here was, what are the ways that you assess weather today? How do you assess this weather risk? Worryingly, the largest chunk was there is no weather assessment, like you've already said, João. Or maybe we were talking about it earlier. You mentioned that you know, on a large project, they still haven't assumed any kind of weather risk in there. And the one I wanted to kind of draw attention to was the integration that we have, Rob, with your software, with the Acumen risk solution. So EHAB and Deltek have a weather calendar solution where you can kind of put some information directly into your QSRA based on weather, you know, accurate weather data with climate change factored in. And I think we believe that that's probably the best solution in terms of the most advanced way to assess that risk. But it's surprising, no, don't you think, that such a small factor, such a small group of people have kind of included that. And just to maybe explain the graph before I kind of ask you guys about the question. So this was a multiple choice. So people were allowed to select multiple different options, which is why, you know, P6 calendars appears in a couple of different places in QSRA calendars, because the user was allowed, or the server participant was allowed to select multiple. So yeah, Rob, what's your kind of thinking on this?
Yes, as you mentioned, you know, we think getting better weather data into your QSRA is certainly the best approach. I was surprised, as you mentioned, that so many people are not doing anything about it or doing little. I mean, back in my early days, certainly we'd put a few, you know, weather days as holidays, non-work days in the calendar in January, you know, because we expected bad weather then. But it seems like a lot of people haven't necessarily moved much further than that. So, you know, certainly we would hope that, you know, they would take advantage of not only risk modeling of weather, which Acumen provides, but probabilistic weather data into the future, which EHAB provides, to combine and get a much better risk analysis for their projects than they're doing today. But the evidence here, at least, doesn't quite show that yet. I think, you know, to some extent, people may not know about, you know, what they can do. And I think another thought is that some people think it's hard, and it has been hard, you know, to find good weather data and take advantage of it. But I think others, hopefully just aren't aware that there are solutions like, the integration we have with EHAB and Acumen Risk, but we'll try to solve that problem as well. So.
Yeah, I agree. I hope it isn't the fact that they don't think that there is a solution, but like you say, it's more just an accessibility problem.
Yeah.
What are you thinking, João?
Yeah, it might be access to the data. I mean, I would say that the problem might be more extensive. To be honest, I think it's lack of knowledge. Perhaps the numbers here match slightly with the first key finding, that people is not treating this as a risk. And I think as sometimes you don't really see the numbers, visual numbers in terms of cost impact, in terms of days lost. People do not really see that as a threat. I've been in situations where I needed to buy the weather data from a local weather institution. For 20 years of historical data, needed to pay 30,000 euros. So I've been in that situation. So sometimes you as a contractor, if you are at tender stage, for example, you don't want to invest that amount of money to get the data from the local weather station. That might be one of the issues. But again, I constantly in the last, I can tell you 100% in the last 2-3 years, I've been involved in over 10 projects, and there was no single project that considered or did any weather risk assessment, weather contemplation in calendars or risk register, nothing, zero. And we are talking about mega projects, right? One of the projects, just to give you an example to the audience as well, was, for example, for the Olympic Games in Paris, where we tested EHAB just to see, the real impact of wind in the installation of the facade of the arena, one of the sports arena. And again, no one looked at that previously, not even through affecting productivities, not through P6 calendars, not through additional buffers, nothing. And you keep going. The examples, we could be here all afternoon talking about the non-contemplation of the weather risk. And this, again, it's shocking, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, I think the one saving grace from the folks or from the kind of the state of climate resilience survey was this, which was that although lots of people had some maybe, as a collection of views in there that we maybe don't agree with as risk professionals, a lot of people did in fact say that they believe that technology and innovation can actually help solve these problems. So at least we have the kind of the view that maybe if they then start to realize how big of a problem these things are, perhaps as they get actually impacted by these things on their projects and they start to perceive it as a more of a risk, then they can start to see, well, actually, yes, technology can play a part. So, Rob, I mean, are you relieved?
It's certainly relieved, yes. If they think there's a technology solution out there, that's a good start. We need to, help them find good solutions. João had mentioned earlier that the cost of the weather data could be an issue. Looking at some recent research, I see one estimate that the weather has cost the construction industry about $1 trillion a year. And not only, the cost, but also the insurance premiums are going up as well, for the projects. So there's certainly an incentive, I think, to do a better job. And, if people believe that technology will help with that, then certainly that gives us an opportunity to to try and drive some innovation into that market space. Hopefully we need to, as best we can anyway, educate them on the solutions we have. I worked with a construction company in Australia that was already identifying 3 types of weather that impacted them, and they looked at them separately, rain, high temperatures, and wind. So they had each of those as a separate weather risk in their risk model, and they had to track them because they had different contingencies and allowances for the cost of each of those. I think when we talk a little bit more about the EHAB solution, I think you have 9 types of weather that you can provide information on. So I think this is a good sign. There is a technical solution to help, and we can certainly talk more about that shortly.
Yeah. No, thanks, Rob. And João, any thoughts on this?
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm not even here, referring to solution that can help running a QSRA, but a solution just to give you those impact of the core non-working days, rather than counting or calculating it in Excel manually and coming with averages and so on. Obviously, having a platform where you write the location and you get the full profile of weather variables. Obviously, it will save time, and more than saving time to the planning or the cost estimation professional, I think is also bringing visibility of those weather variables and risks to the table, and allowing the project director that might not be doing the calculation to see the figures in a standardized way, in a way that can be digested. I think it's important because sometimes, obviously, when you dip into and you go digging, several hundreds of rows in Excel spreadsheets, you end up as well. You need to make sure that the calculation is correctly done. You never know if the weather station was actually close to your project or not. So all these factors will influence on your manual Excel calculation, and obviously having a platform that can facilitate and potentially mitigate some of these issues, as we evolve as well using AI, obviously will definitely help to tackle these sort of issues. So yeah, I mean, for me as a planning and scheduling professional, I think EHAB is great and is definitely saving a lot of time and bringing some clarity into the table, because again, usually the point where you should start looking into this weather data is at pre-construction stage, right? As we all know, when you are at a tender stage, you don't have 6 months available for you to study the weather, right? You need to do the quick exercise in one morning and crack on. So sometimes what happens is, due to the lack of time, you will end up just focusing on precipitation, right? You don't assess temperature, you don't assess wind, you don't assess I was actually checking electrical. One of the weather variables is electrical storm or snow precipitation. So you don't assess all the 9 or 10 risks that the academia has been investigating and researching about, and having that in a single click or in a couple of clicks, obviously that's great.
Yeah. No, thanks, João. Well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and kind of just break out a little bit into some more discussion. So I'm quite curious to hear, because you just mentioned a little bit about the AACE and some of the recommendations. So I just wonder if what the process is for kind of updating the recommendations, and if you think they're kind of up to date, and whether people are getting the right advice when it comes to, because of course that's a big role, right? Is making sure that people, as you said, Rob, making sure people know what they can do. So do you think there's a role to kind of play there around the advice that's given to professionals?
So I mean, from my side, the recommended practice is the 84R, and is planning for adverse weather. I mean, whether or not it's up to date. Obviously, it's from 2013, but I think it's a good starting point, to be honest. First of all, I think it gives you quite good definitions, especially what is a weather day and what is the recovery day or the preparation day. So it slices really the definition of the weather impact in different streams, and I think it's quite nice because it allows you to price and plan differently. So I think that is a starting point. Then the other part of the recommended practice is how do you treat that? Should you go to the schedule and include buffer, or should you use non-working days in the calendar? Obviously, this was written in 2013 as the industry evolves and technology evolves. Obviously, based on my own experience, the tendency is to go into the calendars and marking the non-working days. But potentially tools like EHAB, you don't even need to do that because you can see straight away the impacts on every single activity. So I think it depends. Again, depends how much time you have to do the exercise. Depends which tools do you have available. I think the recommended practice definitely gives you at least the basic guidelines to start looking into this problem. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to really say it's up to date or outdated. I think, in my view, is a starting point. Recognizing that is an issue, understanding how to treat this issue, and it's pretty much a step by step. And then it's up to every single person to decide how to treat this weather problem in the CPM scheduling tool. Ideally, if you allow me, my preference would be to have obviously the contractual documents telling you how to treat this issue, rather than leaving you full open doors to do whatever you want. That will be my preference. And usually when the weather risk is included in your particular conditions, obviously you are increasing the chance that your contractors will look at it. Because if you don't write anything, for sure no one is going to even move a finger to do an exercise around weather risk. And I've seen it over and over. So I think this is a good practice to include on the contractual requirements and start, just sharing this with contractors and making it a requirement. Yeah, I would say that's my view on that.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. So we need something, right? We need documentation that helps us, and whatever we have is great, and the more the better. But I wonder, Rob, do you have a comment on that, or I have another question for you as well?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that. And we certainly see a lot of interest from our customers in better risk analysis and better modeling of weather as a part of that. In the States, and I'm not as familiar with contracts elsewhere in the world, but typically as a part of your proposal, in your proposal schedule, the owner organization wants you to submit a schedule with a certain confidence level and to report that. So they might want an 85% probability on the schedule you're providing, as well as providing the risk register that you've used to assess that. So if that's a part of your proposal, and we're not obviously mitigating the weather, we can't stop the rain, but trying to help you get a better forecast in your schedule, the estimate of the time and the cost so that you can be more accurate and set your customer expectations. And so with that as a fairly standard requirement of proposals, I would think, look, when you're evaluating proposals, if one of the bidders hasn't considered weather as part of the risk in their risk register and the others have, I mean, that would certainly be to me, a factor in, perhaps disqualifying that bid, because it doesn't look at, something that is certainly going to be an impact over the course of any project that's, of any length. If it's a week or two, it's not going to be a problem. But so I think we're going to see more and more. We certainly see a lot of demand for support for modeling weather as a part of the risk analysis. And I think the contractual space is requiring, that sort of information up front. So anybody who wants to be a successful bidder, I think is going to need to take that into account. Even if it's not, a required practice, it's certainly an expected part.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me, there's obviously we're quite savvy into the weather space, considering we do it all day, every day. But more and more, I think, of the tenders that we're part of are mentioning it in some way, shape, or form. It's not consistent, it's not as if this is a standard form. It's obviously starting to perhaps get dropped in more and more. But that was the kind of impetus for our partnership, wasn't it, Rob? And there was a shared client who needed that kind of much more in-depth kind of analysis around the weather. And so it made sense from our perspective to start, I can't remember what it was, about maybe 12, 18 months ago, probably 20, maybe 24 months ago now, when we first had a chat and started to try to understand how we could integrate the way that we kind of do our weather modeling into the Acumen risk solution. But I think it was essential that we had that shared customer, because they were the ones who really drove the need for it and made us go a bit quicker than we would have if we were doing it just us two. But yeah,
Yes.
What do you think about that?
I agree. I mean, we can support the modeling of weather risks in Acumen Risk, but if they don't have good information to use there, then it's only part of the solution, right? So, as you said, the initial customer was kind of driving, okay, we can model weather risks, but we need good weather data, and we need it, appropriately for our locations and for the type of work that we're doing. And that really kind of led into some of the work that EHAB did. I mean, you can actually review the schedule and identify which activities would be impacted by different types of weather, which is another service that people can take advantage of. They can just get the raw weather data to use in the risk analysis, or actually have, their projects, if they can submit the projects for review, have those assessed and look at providing not only the weather risks themselves, but the mapping back to the activities in the schedule. So it simplifies, the work to do by the risk analyst on the project as well. So it actually provides quite a bit of functionality, beyond just the basic capabilities that Acumen had before.
Well, and it's a problem that we kind of started to talk about with the research, where there was lots of people from lots of different regions, and of course that's going to be different weather types that will impact you. But even if you're thinking just across the UK, right? So this shared customer of ours had projects all across the UK, and of course you can't just say, all right, the UK is rainy or whatever it is. Wherever you are in the UK, even a few miles apart, a few kilometers apart, you can start to see differences. Especially if the further west you go, generally it gets rainier, but there's variability there. So I think one of the interesting parts about this particular case, and it's going to be relevant for anyone who is doing more than one or two construction projects, is that we had to get the data as granular as possible, so that it's you can make a more relevant assessment, because it's useful to have weather data, but of course that weather data, as you kind of alluded to, João, if it's the weather station 50 miles away, well, what's the risk of the difference? It might be representative, but it might not be accurate. So I don't know if you've had a case, João, where you've had getting data from quite far away, or
No, I mean, using these examples of getting it from different places in Africa, I mean, you are always unsure how reliable, is the data, right? And we are talking about back in 2009 and 10 and 11. So, I mean, we didn't have any confidence. It was the best we could do for that particular project. But again, we were not 100% sure if that would be accurate for that specific location in the middle of the jungle. So nowadays the things are changing, but back then I think that will definitely be a problem. Um, but again, nowadays usually, at least with me, what happens is we try to go to the closest weather station, and we try to get it. Obviously now with EHAB is a single click, but usually we try to mitigate any issues through contacting the closest or getting it from the closest weather station. Indeed.
Yeah. Sorry, just if anyone has any questions, do put them in the Q&A box. We've still got things to discuss, but if you do drop any questions in, then we'll try to address them. Sorry, Rob, I just thought I'd say that.
Yeah, I was just reminded of another example, where you'd mentioned the initial customer had projects throughout England and had different local weather, and even in the government contracting space, not construction, we see that with weather risk as well. We've got a shipbuilder here in the U.S. who's primarily building up in New England, which is where a lot of traditional shipbuilding is, but they have a partner who's down on our Gulf Coast. And as you know, in the Gulf Coast in the U.S., you have hurricane season and you have some other weather events as well. And so they're manufacturing and barging parts of the ship actually down in, I think it's Alabama, and then having to transport that up the coast, to be mated with the rest of the ship up in New England. And, so different regions, different weather impacts, and certainly can impact projects other than construction as well. So I think the better access to better data is certainly going to help improve the predictability of the projects.
Yeah, well, just on that point, I think it was for us and the integration with Deltek, it's the better data, but then it's also making that into the right format so that if, for example, people are doing a quantitative risk analysis in Deltek, they don't have to fiddle around with, okay, I've got some data now, how do I translate that into the kind of the calendar system within Acumen? We've tried to make it as seamless as possible. I don't know if you want to kind of elaborate on that, Rob.
Good point. Acumen has had, weather events and calendar events in it for some time, but as you mentioned, they expect information in certain formats. And yes, Acumen can export those to Excel and people can put things in. It's still translating historical weather information or forecast weather information into, the specific format that Acumen expected. Takes some manipulation. And, collectively, we want to make it easier for the risk analysts and the schedulers rather than making it harder, right? So they don't want to, collect data, run macros in Excel, reformat data, and get it into a usable state in Acumen. That gives, that's an impediment to getting the work done, right? So the integrated solution, the EHAB data gets provided into an Acumen risk register, and it can be appended to a risk register that already exists. So if they've been building and modeling other threats and opportunities, they don't lose that. Or it can be, used to create a new risk register that they then start from and add the rest of the threats and opportunities too. So it makes it easy for them to incorporate better data, rather than making them become Excel jockeys to get that information into a format that they can use. So yeah, benefits on several levels.
And another part of that accessibility, and so it's funny that we've not mentioned it, is the climate piece, right? So let's say the user has managed to kind of get the data and do all of their analysis. Probably that's a best case scenario, right? Probably they would have just been using historic data as opposed to anything forward looking. And we were just looking at a project the other day, which, you know, it isn't starting until 2026, and then it's finishing way, you know, in 2036. It's not 3036. That's quite a long project. So, you know, of course, over the decade that project is happening, weather is going to change. It's not going to remain static.
Right.
We've already seen the last 20 years has been, you know, weather patterns are changing in a material way. And so you'd expect another 10 years go by and we're going to still see changes. So that's another thing, isn't it, Rob, is about making it so that it's not just historic data, it's not just making it easily integratable, but it's factoring in a larger, longer term model as well, if that's relevant to your project. You know, I think that's an important point.
Yes, and you know, any of the mega projects that are going on, it is certainly going to be relative. As you mentioned, the timeframes are quite long for some of these capital projects or infrastructure projects. I know it seems like the highways here in Colorado have been under construction for the last 10 years. So, and I'm sure that's common in a lot of areas. But, yeah, so the predictive nature for the future forecast is also a significant feature that the integration provides.
What do you think, João? And relevance with the long-term modeling?
No, I mean, I think is a trendy topic, hot topic as well. But I'm definitely, from my side, I'm waiting on AI developments to increase accuracy around that topic. So obviously you have the risk analysis software and platforms, but I'm really curious to see the next year's development on that weather modeling on the long term. When you mentioned the 2036, I thought you were talking about iSpeed 2 for a moment, but or
no,
half
not
of, or 50% of it, but I'm definitely waiting on you know further development on technology and AI to tackle that prediction of weather.
Yeah, no. Well, my one last comment on that is that there's a difference between weather forecasting and impact forecasting, because it's very difficult to forecast exactly what the weather will be on a certain day, but actually you can be much more accurate if you're just saying, well, will my activity that's influenced by these types of weather, will that be successful or not? So they are separate things, but I agree, AI can enhance both of those. We're approaching time, so Rob, I'd invite you to kind of maybe summarize your thoughts and kind of make any last statement, if you're happy to.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you a question as well. If you could remind me of the different types of weather that EHAB can consider, because I think it was quite a number. But in terms of summarizing my thoughts, I think, you know, the weather certainly impacting construction has forever and is changing, as you mentioned, as global warming is impacting, you know, directly impacting things like the heat, but that impacts the humidity and the rain. And, you know, so really the ability to take that into account in forecasting for longer term projects, significant. The integration that we've done between the EHAB system and Acumen makes it easier to access that information and take advantage of that. We saw that people are looking, you know, a lot of people think technology will provide improvements in the risk information. So we're certainly working together to provide that sort of solution. And anyone, you know, on the webinar today, if they're interested in more specific information on how the integration works or Acumen or EHAB, you know, would ask them to reach out to us. I've looked a couple of times at the Q&A section in the meeting, and it says the Q&A wasn't set up for this meeting, so I'm not sure that people are able to actually ask questions, but they should have our contact information as a part of the meeting so that they can get back to us if they have those questions, I would hope.
Yes, apologies if people have been trying to type in questions and I've set up the meeting wrong. That's on me. So please do, I'll send around an email follow-up. So if people do have questions, we can do that. João, do you have kind of any summarizing thoughts?
Yeah, I think, I mean, from my side, really great to see these numbers and discuss them. I guess I believe, again, as a industry, construction really need to step up and start, doing the basics. What we discussed here today is actually the basics. It's nothing else. And hopefully, again, by the clients being aware and owners being aware of these risks as such, hopefully, and I hope so, that you start seeing a little bit more comprehensive requirements at contractual documents, because definitely this will help the industry to accommodate and treat this as a real weather. And in the end of the day, what we are looking for, and especially again as a planner, as a planning professional, it's increasing accuracy and having proper planned and planning and programs, and help the delivery of the projects. In the end of the day, saving time, saving money to everyone. And especially, obviously, being a taxpayer, I do care about the public infrastructure. And in the end of the day, it's our pockets that are suffering with, again, I would probably use my French, ignorance in the end of the day, right? So that's what we need to tackle. But again, I think we are in the right path.
Yeah. No, thanks, João. Thanks, Rob. Really appreciate your thoughts and comments. So on my side, just to wrap up, I can see there is one question that has jumped in via the chat. And so they've just asked, other than weather, what other forecastable data can be modeled? So I'll just quickly answer Rob's question, which is, we do wave height, temperature, wind speed, gust speed. That's temperature low and high. We also do snowfall, precipitation in an hour and over a day. And we also do fog, and we'll be bringing on tidal ranges as well pretty soon. So obviously offshore projects quite impacted by weather. But Rob, did you want to add anything on that question? Other than weather, what other forecastable data can be modeled?
Yeah, and I've got a hard stop at the hour as well, but Acumen allows you to model basically any type of threat or opportunity. So it could be, as you can imagine, all the types of risks that you might run into. The threats, opportunities, weather events, calendar events, the probabilistic weather that EHAB can provide. And then, of course, you have other modeling techniques that you can use to combine those things, correlation and different distribution curves and that sort of thing. So it's really open-ended in terms of what types of things can be modeled.
Thanks, Rob. Well, thanks. I know João had to jump off. I know you've got to go, Rob. So thanks so much to everyone who's attended. Yeah, I've been Josh. So we're weather specialists. That's why we're really focused on the weather. I'm happy to stay around for another minute or so. I know there's another question that's just popped into the chat box. So Rob, feel free to jump off if you would like. So are you seeing change in the 10-year average, which is used for NEC contracts due to climate change, that might make forecasting the impact of weather events for long duration projects going forward? Yes, absolutely. So big bit of data from a previous bit of research that we did, and feel free if everyone you have to jump off. Thanks for joining. I'll just finish with this question. So we found that over the last 20 years, there's been a 1,500% increase in the likelihood of extreme events, and those particularly that affect construction and delay construction, and can cause those types of delays that would, you would consider a meaningful impact. So yes, I think ultimately the answer is yes, there has been a change in that 10-year average. So my view is that we, in the NEC, they should be rethinking the way that they structure those contracts, because I believe the way that they work today is that they will just rely on the Met Office's report, which just looks at data up until 2010. So it's not really factoring in the most recent data into those averages. So good question. Thanks again, everyone, for attending. I will send an email around with the recording so that if you want to share it with any of your colleagues who weren't able to attend, then you can do that. All right, everyone, I'll stop the meeting now. Have a great evening and see you later.